Buckingham Palace had witnessed coronations, resignations, funerals, and declarations of war, but nothing prepared the royal household for the moment a dark velvet covering was pulled away from an historic palace plaque. There, engraved beside the name of Queen Elizabeth II, stood another name, Catherine. Courtiers froze. Cameras surged forward, and within seconds, what appeared to be a simple alteration became the most powerful statement about the monarchy's future in a generation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The ceremony took place inside the grand entrance corridor, where visiting leaders and senior royals pass during major state occasions. A commemorative plaque is a permanent engraved marker honoring people connected to an institution's history. This corridor held names linked to defining chapters of the monarchy, so Catherine's inclusion carried far greater weight than an ordinary dedication. It placed her inside the palace's official story of continuity. Catherine stood before the stone with William beside her. The princess touched its edge, then quickly withdrew her hand. She whispered that Elizabeth's name should never feel overshadowed. William answered quietly, reminding her that the late queen had believed service was strengthened when carried forward, not preserved as something untouchable. Yet his reassurance could not hide the pressure of seeing his wife publicly joined to the monarch who had defined an era. Charles read the two names together and lowered his glasses. The king said nothing. His silence revealed that he understood the deeper symbolism. The palace had not simply honored Catherine's work. It had placed her beside the woman whose emotional authority had once held the entire family together. The most explosive detail remained hidden until aides compared the final engraving with the approved design. Catherine's name had originally appeared on a separate lower panel. Only hours before the unveiling, a final royal instruction ordered both names onto the same line. Someone had deliberately transformed recognition into succession symbolism. Camilla entered expecting a routine heritage dedication. The queen consort had not been briefed about the revised arrangement. When the covering fell, she froze before the gathered household, then turned toward Charles with disbelief she could not fully conceal. William noticed that look. He also saw the king refuse to meet her eyes. In that instant, the prince understood that the plaque was not merely commemorative. It was the public face of a private struggle already dividing the palace. But before anyone could understand why Catherine had been placed beside the late queen, they first had to confront what each royal stood to gain, and what one of them feared she was about to lose. The plaque carried only 2 engraved names, yet 4 lives were suddenly trapped inside its meaning. For Catherine, it was an honor heavy with grief. For William, it was recognition of years spent protecting the crown's future. For Charles, it was a decision that blurred the boundary between his mother's legacy and his own reign. And for Camilla, the empty space where her name might have appeared felt louder than any public declaration. Catherine had spent years studying Elizabeth's discipline, restraint, and belief that service must always come before personal comfort. The late queen had not simply represented authority, she had defined the standard the princess believed she would one day have to uphold. That made the engraving deeply personal. It also made it dangerous. A permanent palace inscription is not ordinary praise. It places a royal figure inside the official memory of the institution. William understood the burden immediately. The prince saw the plaque as recognition of everything his wife had carried through illness, public scrutiny, and private instability. Catherine had protected the family while preparing for responsibilities neither of them could avoid. Yet he also knew that praise inside the monarchy could become pressure with astonishing speed. Catherine admitted that fear in a private antechamber after the ceremony. An antechamber is a smaller room used before entering a formal royal space. She told William that being placed beside Elizabeth could create expectations no living person could fulfill. Admiration, she warned, might become another form of captivity if every future decision were judged against an almost sacred memory. Camilla faced a different wound. The queen consort sat alone while an aide removed her gloves and asked why she had discovered the final design beside photographers rather than through Charles. Her anger was not only about exclusion from the plaque, it was about exclusion from the decision. Charles had made that decision himself. The king reviewed Catherine's record of service and personally approved the same line engraving, knowing the symbolism would provoke resentment within his household. He believed the recognition was deserved, but he also understood that it would be read as a transfer of emotional authority. William had not requested it. The future king learned of the change only after the stone had already been carved and sealed for installation. That revelation silenced accusations that he had engineered his wife's elevation. Then a senior archivist approached Catherine privately. An archivist is the official responsible for preserving royal records and historical documents. He told her the plaque's final wording echoed a phrase Elizabeth had once used in a confidential evaluation of her role. That single reference to Elizabeth's private words led the family backward to one overlooked ceremony when the late monarch made a judgment that would eventually reshape Buckingham Palace itself. Years before Catherine's name appeared beside Elizabeth's, one private moment changed the late Queen's understanding of who could protect the monarchy after her. It happened without cameras, applause, or public ceremony. A chair was left empty, a planned address was abandoned, and while senior royals struggled to contain a family crisis, Catherine made a choice so quiet that few understood its importance. Elizabeth noticed, and from that evening onward, she never looked at the future princess in quite the same way. The monarchy was under intense pressure when Windsor Castle prepared to host bereaved military families. The Windsor Remembrance Reception was a private gathering created to honor relatives who had lost loved ones in service. Its purpose mattered because those families had come seeking recognition from the crown, not evidence of another royal conflict. Yet hours before the event, disagreements behind closed doors threatened to disrupt everything. Catherine still had no constitutional authority. That meant she held no formal power to command senior royals or alter official plans. She could have stepped aside and allowed advisors to cancel the address. Instead, she understood what abandonment would mean. Guests who had already endured loss might interpret royal disorder as indifference. The crisis deepened when Charles and William were called away after a fierce private dispute. Their chairs remained empty, and Elizabeth's prepared address sat untouched. Catherine entered the reception alone, took the speech cards, and delivered the monarch's message without adding her own name or claiming the moment as hers. Elizabeth watched from a side doorway. The Queen saw Catherine kneel beside a grieving child, listen without interruption, and return the speech cards as quietly as she had taken them. Later, the monarch told her that duty was proved most clearly when no applause was expected. Catherine carried those words for years, never knowing Elizabeth had recorded something even more powerful. That night, the Queen wrote a private assessment describing Catherine as the steady name beside the crown when the hour becomes uncertain. The note was placed inside a sealed continuity file, a protected collection of instructions and judgments intended to guide future monarchs during transitions. Years later, Charles received that file while considering how his mother's service should be memorialized inside Buckingham Palace. The king read the phrase twice. Then he interpreted it literally. He ordered Catherine's name placed beside Elizabeth's. Camilla saw something else in that decision. The queen consort believed it violated a promise made to her after the coronation, a promise that no symbolic honor would appear to diminish her place beside Charles. And when Camilla finally confronted Charles over that broken promise, the argument moved beyond stone, titles, or ceremony. It became a reckoning over love, loyalty, and who truly represented his reign. The public saw polished smiles beneath the palace chandeliers. Behind a closed drawing room door, however, the ceremony collapsed into accusation. Camilla did not challenge Catherine's service. She challenged the message Charles had allowed the palace to send, that Elizabeth's moral legacy now passed through another woman. When the king entered, she was already standing beside the window, the unveiling program folded tightly in her hand. What followed was not a disagreement, it was a line finally crossed. Camilla had believed one promise would protect her place. After the coronation, Charles privately assured her that the defining symbols of his reign would reflect their partnership and never place another royal woman above her ceremonial position. A ceremonial position is the public rank and symbolic role a royal holds during state occasions. To the queen consort, the plaque did not simply honor Catherine. It created a future story in which Elizabeth, William, and the princess formed one continuous line while she stood outside it. Camilla placed the folded program on Charles's desk and asked why he had allowed her to be surprised before the household and the cameras. The king answered that the engraving honored continuity, not rank. She rejected the distinction. Symbols, she argued, became power the moment the public believed them. Charles refused to soften the decision. Camilla demanded that the plaque be altered before visitors entered the corridor. The monarch removed his glasses, placed them down, and said his mother's written judgment could not be edited to protect present discomfort. His words landed with brutal clarity. Elizabeth's assessment now carried more authority than the promise he had made after his own coronation. Camilla then accused William of using the archive note to strengthen Catherine's standing. The queen consort believed the prince had turned private memory into a weapon against her. Charles denied it immediately. William had neither proposed the placement nor influenced the final wording. The decision belonged to the king alone. Then Charles revealed the reasoning he had hidden. Recent instability had convinced him that the country needed to know where the future crown's emotional center rested. He had watched Catherine steady the family through illness, division, and uncertainty, so he chose her. Camilla left without answering. Outside the door, she found William waiting. The queen consort stopped and asked whether he intended to let Catherine replace every woman who had come before her. William's answer would matter, but the deeper question was no longer who wanted the plaque. It was who possessed the authority to make its message permanent. The engraving had not been approved through sentiment alone. Beneath the ceremony lay a chain of authority involving the king, the royal archives, the palace surveyor, and a sealed continuity instruction, preserved after Elizabeth's death. Every signature had been placed with extraordinary care. Every word had survived legal review. And when Camilla's representatives searched for a way to reverse the decision, they discovered the most unsettling truth of all. Removing Catherine's name would require Charles to publicly reject his mother's final judgment. The master of the household reviewed the wording first, followed by the keeper of the royal archives and the Palace Heritage Council. The master of the household is the senior official responsible for the practical running of royal residences and major ceremonies. The Heritage Council protects the historical meaning of palace spaces. Together, they examined whether the inscription honored the past without creating an unofficial claim to rank. Elizabeth's handwritten assessment carried unusual weight. It was not a constitutional command, meaning it could not legally order Charles to act. Yet the page had been attached to a continuity memorandum, a protected document explaining how the late queen wanted her service legacy represented after her death. Ignoring it remained possible. Doing so publicly would have carried a devastating meaning. Anne read the memorandum inside the archive room and closed the folder carefully. The princess told Charles that their mother had never distributed praise without purpose. He held Elizabeth's handwritten page and admitted he had delayed acting because he knew the words would hurt Camilla. The king also confessed that burying them would feel like betraying the woman who had prepared him for the throne. Anne then revealed her own role. She had ensured the note was not absorbed into general correspondence after Elizabeth's death. The princess insisted it remain connected to every future decision concerning continuity. Without her intervention, the assessment might have disappeared among thousands of private papers. Catherine had not sought the honor. When she was privately informed, the princess asked for her name to appear beneath Elizabeth's rather than beside it. Charles refused. To him, the phrase "beside the crown" was not decorative language. It was the heart of his mother's judgment. The consequences moved beyond stone almost immediately. Palace officials began revising remembrance services, legacy ceremonies, and family representation plans to place Catherine closer to the center of continuity events. Camilla's role was not erased, but the queen consort could feel its boundaries narrowing. By the following morning, the engraving had begun rearranging the living palace, and the first visible consequence arrived in the form of an altered state program, and one chair quietly moved aside. The first consequence did not arrive through an announcement. It arrived through furniture. Before a palace reception honoring long-serving Commonwealth representatives, an aide entered the ballroom and moved one chair from the central presentation line. Catherine's seat was placed beside Charles. Camilla's was shifted toward the receiving party. The movement lasted seconds, but when the queen consort entered and saw the new arrangement, she understood immediately. The plaque had already begun changing the hierarchy around her. Palace planners had revised the ceremonial programs within hours of the unveiling. A ceremonial program is the official plan showing where royals stand, speak, and receive guests during major events. Catherine was now designated as the principal representative for occasions linked to Elizabeth's service legacy, charitable continuity, and the future direction of the family. The change mattered because public position inside the monarchy often becomes a visible language of authority. Camilla still retained her title and formal status beside Charles. Nothing had been removed on paper, yet her role was now being tied more closely to the king's present reign, while Catherine was associated with the inherited moral legacy of the late queen. The difference sounded subtle. Inside the palace, it felt enormous. Camilla paused beside the altered seating line and asked an aide who had approved the change. The official answered that the order came from the king's private office. The queen consort took her place without speaking, but her silence carried more anger than protest. Charles noticed. So did Catherine. Catherine turned to William and admitted she had never wanted recognition to become humiliation. The princess feared every new honor would be interpreted as another public defeat for Camilla. William told his wife not to apologize for a decision she had neither requested nor designed. The prince understood her compassion, but he refused to let guilt erase what she had earned. Then a second program surfaced. William learned that Catherine would deliver the principal address at an upcoming Elizabeth II memorial service. A principal address is the main speech representing the institution's official message. Camilla had expected that responsibility to be shared. The queen consort responded by withdrawing from a private reception with palace trustees. She sent a short message stating that she would not participate in ceremonies designed to diminish her. The refusal confirmed that resentment had moved beyond private discomfort. Catherine finally decided silence was no longer protection. She requested a meeting with Camilla, without Charles, William, aides, secretaries, or prepared statements. The palace expected another confrontation, but when the two women finally sat alone, Catherine did something no advisor had instructed her to do. There were no courtiers in the room, no briefing folders on the table, and no husbands present to soften or sharpen the truth. Catherine arrived first, and waited beside an unlit fireplace. Camilla entered several minutes later, closed the door herself, and remained standing. For the first time since the unveiling, the two women faced each other without titles, ceremony, or institutional protection. Catherine could have defended the honor. Instead, she began with an admission that immediately changed the atmosphere. Catherine had chosen a small morning room away from the state apartments. A morning room is a private sitting space used for informal conversations rather than official business. She avoided every room connected to the plaque, Elizabeth, or ceremonial authority, because she did not want history sitting between them before either woman had spoken. Their positions were different, and both understood it. Catherine represented the monarchy's future beside William, while Camilla's place remained tied to Charles and the present reign. The engraving changed no legal rank, but symbols could wound more deeply than rules. It made the queen consort feel like a temporary chapter between Elizabeth's revered era and the court that would follow. Catherine spoke first. She told Camilla that she had seen her face during the unveiling, and understood that learning the truth beside photographers had been cruel. The princess did not defend the secrecy. She said good intentions could not erase humiliation, especially when the person affected had been denied the dignity of preparation. Camilla finally sat down. The queen consort admitted she did not fear Catherine as a person. She feared disappearance. One reign had begun with Elizabeth's memory towering over it, and the next was already forming around William and his wife. Camilla wondered whether history would remember her as anything more than the woman standing briefly between them. Catherine answered with a boundary rather than a victory. She promised never to use Elizabeth's name as a weapon of precedence. A question of precedence decides who stands, speaks, or enters first during royal events. The princess insisted that memorial appearances should honor service, not become public contests between royal women. Silence followed. Then Camilla withdrew her demand to alter the plaque. She said removing Catherine's name would turn private pain into a public rejection of Elizabeth's judgment. The engraving would remain. Camilla then agreed to stand beside Catherine when the public entered the palace to view it. The decision did not erase resentment, but it replaced open rivalry with deliberate restraint. Their private agreement remained unknown, but when the palace gates opened, and the world saw the two women beneath those engraved names, the reaction became impossible to control. By sunrise, the image had traveled across Britain, Elizabeth's name, Catherine's name, and two royal women standing beneath them without visible hostility. Newspapers treated the engraving as a declaration of succession. Broadcasters called it a bridge between reigns. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered behind the barriers, carrying photographs of the late Queen and handwritten messages for Catherine. Yet one spontaneous moment, not the official ceremony, captured what the country believed the plaque truly represented. Buckingham Palace described the plaque as a tribute to Elizabeth's enduring example of service and Catherine's responsibility to carry that example into the next generation. A royal continuity role is the duty of preserving the values and public trust of one reign while preparing the institution for another. The wording avoided any claim that Catherine had been elevated above Camilla, yet the same line engraving sent a message stronger than the official statement. Commentators immediately asked whether Catherine had become the monarchy's principal female figure of continuity before becoming queen. The princess watched the coverage from a palace sitting room and grew tearful when broadcasters compared her restraint during recent hardships with Elizabeth's steadiness during national crisis. She did not hear the comparison as praise, she heard it as a standard she feared she could never fully meet. Camilla faced harsher language. Several headlines described the queen consort as eclipsed, yet she refused to withdraw from the public viewing. She told Charles that bitterness would not be allowed to define the day. The king understood what that decision cost her. Camilla would stand beneath an inscription that had wounded her and choose composure over public resentment. One morning newspaper captured the symbolism with brutal simplicity. Its full-page front showed the two engraved names beneath the headline, "The Line of Duty." Catherine's hand rested below Elizabeth's inscription, never covering it. The image suggested succession without erasure, inheritance without replacement. Then the public created its own meaning. At the palace railings, an elderly woman raised a faded coronation photograph of Elizabeth. Beside her, a young girl lifted a picture of Catherine. The crowd began applauding when both images were held together. The gesture crossed generations without speeches, ranks, or palace approval. Charles watched the response and began rewriting his evening statement by hand. The monarch had intended to explain the plaque as a matter of heritage. Instead, moved by the crowd and Camilla's choice to attend, he decided to speak about Elizabeth, Catherine, William, and the woman beside him. That evening, Charles stood before the nation, not to announce another elevation, but to deliver the final verdict on why two names now shared one place in royal history. When Charles finally spoke, he did not describe the plaque as a promotion, a succession order, or a victory for one woman over another. He called it a promise between generations. Elizabeth's name represented a lifetime of duty completed. Catherine's represented duty still unfolding. Between them stood a family that had nearly allowed grief, insecurity, and rivalry to corrupt the meaning of service. The king's final words transformed the engraving from a source of division into a declaration of responsibility. Charles delivered the explanation through a recorded palace address, speaking directly to the country after days of speculation. A recorded palace address is an official message released in the monarch's own words rather than through unnamed advisors. The king said Catherine's inclusion recognized her commitment to carrying Elizabeth's principles of service into the monarchy William would one day lead. The monarch also drew a firm boundary around the honor. No title had changed, No constitutional authority had transferred, and no stage of succession had been accelerated. The plaque did not replace Camilla or declare Catherine queen before her time. Its power was moral, historical, and symbolic, a permanent acknowledgement of character rather than rank. Charles then honored both women. He thanked Camilla for standing beside him through the burdens of his reign and acknowledged the pain caused by the secrecy surrounding the final design. The king also thanked Catherine for accepting a responsibility that linked his mother's example with the future his grandchildren would inherit. Catherine received those words without triumph. After the address, the princess returned to the corridor alone and placed a small white rose beneath Elizabeth's name. She quietly said that the honor belonged to everyone still carrying forward the late queen's work. Even in recognition, she refused to make the moment entirely her own. Camilla joined her moments later. The queen consort placed a second rose beside Catherine's and remained there without speaking. No apology passed between them, but none was required. Her gesture confirmed that she accepted the plaque while preserving her own dignity and her place beside Charles. William watched from the doorway and understood the true inheritance. Catherine had not inherited Elizabeth's position. She had inherited the harder demand to place service above personal injury, even when honor arrived carrying guilt, pressure, and pain. The plaque became neither a rejection of Camilla nor a coronation before its time. It marked Catherine as the living custodian of Elizabeth's values and confirmed that the monarchy's future would be judged by steadiness, sacrifice, and service. And so the two names remained together, not as rivals across time, but as the completed duty of one queen placed beside the unfinished promise of another, giving Buckingham Palace a clear and permanent symbol of where the monarchy had been, and who would carry it forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.